Hi everyone, and welcome to this new Cubzh video where we're going to learn how to add sounds to our Cubzh games. And of course, many thanks to Cubzh for sponsoring this episode. So today we're going to take a look at the engine's audio utilities. We'll see how to use the built-in library of sounds and how to modify those slightly on the fly, thanks to an easy-to-use API interface, to create our own variations. And just before we dive in, let's get a quick overview of how playing sounds works in Cubzh. Like in virtually all game engines, adding audio to your Cubzh games requires that you add two objects to your scene: an audio source and an audio listener. As the names imply, the audio source is what will emit a sound, and the audio listener is what will receive it. You may have multiple audio sources in your scene, but you'll only have one audio listener at a time, cause those are essentially like a proxy of the sound of your computer, and you have just one computer at a time. That's why, as we'll see in a second, the audio listener is automatically pre-created by Cubzh and readily available in any Cubzh game script as the audio listener variable. An audio source is characterized by several parameters. The most crucial one, of course, is the sound that it's playing. That's either a string referencing a built-in audio clip, or a more complex pack of data that you streamed from a sound file of your own, but in any case, this determines what noises or music notes the source will actually emit. Other common properties include the volume of the source, that determines how loud the source is relative to the others, and that goes from 0, which is complete silence, to 1, which is the maximum volume. There's also a boolean that tells Cubzh whether your source should loop the sound, and auto-restarts when it finishes playing it, which is aptly named loop. And as you can see in the docs page, there are even more that we'll explore as we play around with the API in-game. So okay, with all this in mind, let's now dive in Cubzh and load or create a new world. Inside, I'll clean up the startup code and replace it with the basic logic that just instantiates my player in the world, as we've studied in this previous episode of the series. Now the first step is to add our audio listener, and because it's a bit like giving ears to our player avatar, it usually makes sense to have this object follow our avatar in the game. And the good news is that, because the audio listener object is pre-created, as we said before, all this can be done with just a single line of code, like this. Okay, so we can now hear sounds, but of course if we were to play the game, it would still be silent, since for now there are no audio sources in the scene to really emit sound. To create a source, we just need to call the audio source constructor. We can pass it a string of a built-in sound to load directly, or define or redefine the sound afterwards, by accessing and setting the sound property. The Cubzh built-in library of sounds currently contains a fair amount of audio clips that were designed by a professional sound designer and that are very common game sounds like explosion, weapon interactions, environmental cues, and so on. You can see and preview all of those directly in the Cubzh docs at this address, and I've also put the link in the description of this video. Once we've chosen the sound that we want to play, the next step, like with any other object in Cubzh, is to actually add our audio source to the hierarchy, so that it actually lives in the scene. For now, we'll start easy and put it in the world at the position of the player. And finally, we simply need to call the play method on our audio source object, to truly tell it to start playing its sound. If we want to stop the sound manually after some specific delay, typically if we told our source to loop, or if we don't want to wait for the entire audio clip to finish, we can of course call its counterpart, the stop method, for example after a little timer of 2 seconds. So to sum up, this code snippet tells Cubzh to instantiate an audio source, playing this built-in sound, start to play, and after 2 seconds, switch off the audio source. And that's it. We've already made a simple functional implementation of an audio system in our Cubzh game. If we republish it, you'll hear that as soon as the game starts, we hear our sound for 2 seconds and then it stops. With this audio source ready, we can then play around with some of its properties to better integrate it in our game. For example, we could lower its volume slightly to make it more of an ambient sound, and we could set it to loop indefinitely. But here, there's actually another problem with our current setup. If we comment out the early stop of our sound and let it play in our game, then we restart the scene, you'll notice that as I walk away from my initial position, and therefore from the audio source since we instantiated it at our feet, the sound fades away. This is because Cubzh audio sources are specialized by default, meaning that the volume of the source depends on the distance between it and the audio listener. So as I get closer, it gets louder, and as I get further away, it gets dimmer. Also, if you're wearing a headset right now, you'll notice that if the object is on my left in the 3D world, then the sound will be moved slightly to my left ear, and vice versa. That's super cool in lots of cases, because most of the sounds in a game are linked to an object or a character that has a specific position in the scene. And so it's nice that it has this spatialization, because it really helps create a more logic and immersive world to our ears. However, in our case, this wind atmosphere isn't tied to any particular spot. It should actually play wherever we are on the map. To do this, we just need to turn the specialized property of our audio source off. And here we go. The sound is now global to the whole scene, and the volume doesn't change as we move away from it or towards it. By the way, making an audio source non-specialized also allows us to play around with its pan value if we want, which Cubzh blocks for specialized audio sources. The pan is what makes the sound move to the left or the right here of a headset, so it's kind of like what was happening before with the specialized version, except that this time we are the one controlling which side the sound is moving to. So a pan goes from -1 when it's full left to +1 when it's full right, and it can be key in creating a richer and a more complete soundscape for a listener. But here, of course, our wind ambience is the only sound I've got, and so moving it to a side would probably just make things a bit imbalanced. So it's actually better to leave it to the default center position, so with a pan of 0. Okay, so that's really cool. We now have a cool atmosphere for our game. But at this point, you might be thinking that though it's very cool that we are able to set up sounds so easily, we're a bit limited by this built-in list of sounds. I mean, there are quite a few variations, and many basic games don't need more than this, but perhaps you don't want to repeat this exact sword swoosh in all of your Cubzh games. In that case, you may want to try and play around with 3 other properties of your audio sources: the pitch, the start at, and the stop at. So, start at and stop at are straightforward. They're just a way to tell the engine that you don't want to play the entire clip, but rather a subclip that goes from a given start at time to a given stop at time. Now, this might seem like it's not a big deal, but actually, sampling the built-in sounds from Cubzh's library can create brand new audio clips that are really cool. The pitch is another nice way of modifying sound. It's a number that lets us change the frequency of the sound to make it higher or lower, and so it can completely transform its impact on the listener. If it's lower than 1, the resulting sound will be lower than the original, and if it's higher than 1, then the resulting sound will be higher. Note that it can never be equal to 0, but it can technically go to +infinity. Typically, let's consider that we have this broken glass 1 built-in sound. It sounds like this. Now, what if we wanted to turn it into a broken clay sound, like a pot-breaking Link fanatic? Well, if we sample just the beginning, we get this new sound. that has the short and sharp feel of a clay breaking down. But of course, still sounds like glass cause it's too high for clay. So we'll lower it by reducing its pitch to something lower than 1, for example 0.4. Now if we put it in our Cubzh game by creating another audio source and re-injecting those parameters, then let's say we play it when we use the action 2, then when we republish and replay our game, we see that as soon as we left click with our mouse, we hear our brand new broken clay sound. So we've just created our very own audio clip using a built-in sound and transforming it. So on that note, here you go. You now know the basics of adding sounds to your Cubzh games. Now, of course, this tutorial covered a large amount of features from the Cubzh audio source and audio listener pair of tools, but there's still one thing that we didn't discuss, and that's how to load your own sound files using the engine's HTTP utilities. So if you're curious and you want to learn more on how to do this, don't hesitate to drop a comment down below and I'll make a follow-up episode to this video on this specific topic. And as usual, if you want to discover Cubzh by yourself, feel free to go say hi on the Discord and join the community. And of course, don't hesitate to like and share this video and to subscribe to the channel to not miss the next ones. As always, thanks for watching and take care.